As soon as I get some of these videos loaded up, I
Alrighty.
can, yeah.
Well, welcome everyone. This is our last of our 4 sessions in the Rapier track for West Kingdom Virtual Beltane. And I am your hostess, Bridget Chase. And for our last session, we have Ogata-san, who is from, I can't remember.
The Barony of South Downs in Meridias.
In the Meridias. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to him. All righty.
Excellent. All right. So I'll get some of these videos up and loaded later on. But, oh gosh. Right. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember like how the audio is going to work on this. Yeah, if I mute myself over to here. And we're already getting feedback, my bad.
Okay.
Okay. So
however it works for you, hon.
Awesome. Okay. That's right. So I'm gonna share the screen so y'all can see the slideshow.
We can see it. That. Oh, okay. We can see that.
Excellent. Okay, cool.
Good.
Good to know. All right. Okay, yeah, that's right. So I'll run audio through my phone, and it won't matter that you can't see me right now because you'll be looking at the slideshow. Awesome. So, well, hello everybody. The name of this class is Intro to Katana and SCA Fencing. Before I start, I just want to thank the Kingdom of the West for hosting me, and I'd also like to thank Bridget the Chase for putting together this lovely rapier track so far. My name is Ogata Genjiro Mitsui. Mundanely, I'm just known as Charlie Denton. I'm a lord in the SCA, and I've lived in the Barony of South Downs in the Kingdom of Meridias since 2017. I got my master's degree in digital media last year, but that's not totally important. So today I'm giving you an introductory lesson on the katana. This class is the result of combining what I've learned over the past 5 years being a fencer and what I've learned over the past year and a half now of studying Japanese martial arts, mostly from an armchair perspective. So I've written this class primarily for fencers, for rapier fencers, but I think it can be interesting for anyone researching extra-European topics generally. So I'm going to start this off speaking to you from my phone, showing you the slideshow on my laptop. I've got a few weapons I'll show you in a minute, as well as so the slides, the videos, and in about halfway through, we'll switch over to a physical demonstration so you can see some of what Kenjutsu looks like in an embodied form. So right now, if you'd like to follow along with that demonstration later on, you have until then to clear yourself a space, grab a sword, do whatever. All right, so first slide. Why bring a katana to a rapier duel? The specific weapon pairing presents, I think, a really unique mechanical puzzle. So as we'll see later on, the construction of a commercially available katana simulator and its use in 2 hands allows for really nimble and precise blade work. That's the advantage of like maneuverability and leverage. Conversely, a rapier's range allows for efficient defensible thrusts. So that's the kind of pairing that we're looking at. If you're practicing Kenjutsu in the SCA, you're going to run into a lot of rapier fencers. It's just a fact of the game. And so that's the kind of fencer you really have to be prepared to go up against. And this class is about how you do that. And over the past year and a half now, just thinking about the interplay between those 2 weapon styles, that's been really satisfying for me to like just keep my mind occupied. Honestly, I really can't wait to try this out and try out what I've learned with people at practice and people at events. And another reason why I'm doing this class is I don't think the katana really gets the respect that it's owed on the on the fencing field. pardon me. But yeah, in Meridia's at least, I can. There are a handful of people who use a katana, and it's kind of seen as a novelty thing. Like, oh, you're just using a long dagger or a short rapier, and you don't have much of a guard, and it's going to go poorly for you. I think that's just it's just a result of the instruction not being very widely available. Now, for anyone entering the SCA, they'll naturally pick up a katana. They'll pick up a rapier before like finding out about the katana or realizing there are commercial katana simulators on the market. That's not a problem. It's just the most logical choice for our game that the entry weapon is a rapier. However, the level of instruction available for katana, I think it doesn't meet the level of curiosity in the weapon. There are some really good katana simulators on the market right now. But if we don't study kenjutsu, that's traditional Japanese swordsmanship, then people are more likely to try and use a katana as if it were a rapier. And that's where you're going to probably run into a bad time. And you may not even realize why. So I'm trying to prevent that if possible. And so I'm teaching this class to encourage kenjutsu scholarship and start discussions around the style and the weapons. All right, moving on. So what do I mean by kenjutsu? I mean just traditional Japanese swordsmanship, and specifically the kind of style or school that I've been studying is Yagyu Shinkage Ryu, or the Yagyu New Shadow School. This school was founded sometime prior to 1565, so well within our period, by Kami-Izumi Hidetsuna, originally as Shinkage Ryu. And then later on, there we go, early history. So yeah, later on, Kami-Izumi Hidetsuna, Nobutsuna, they're the same person. They bequeathed the school to Yagyu Munetoshi around that time. And at that point, it becomes the Yagyu school. Munetoshi adds his family name onto it, and it becomes a patrilineal school. So it passes from father to son, and so the fathers and sons are taught as headmasters of the school. Then in 1594, Munetoshi takes on Tokugawa Ieyasu as his student. Tokugawa would later on become shogun, and then after that, Munetoshi's son Yagyu Munenori becomes Tokugawa Iemitsu's kenjutsu instructor. Iemitsu was I forget if he was the child or grandchild of Ieyasu, but point is we have a line, for all intents and purposes, the fencing instructors of the Japanese shogunate. And around 1632, Munenori completes his treatise, the Heiho Karen Sho, which basically means the, let's see, got the subtitle here somewhere. Pretty much it's the family transmitted or generational book of swordsmanship. And that word, like swordsmanship, that's going to show up many places. Kenjutsu, it could refer to the use of a sword. It could refer to strategy, not just the strategy of using a sword, but just strategy in any kind of respect, really. It's the study of kenjutsu. So some fun facts about that book in particular, the Heiho Karen Sho. Aside from being a book of swordsmanship and the use of it, it's, let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. The text is really profoundly influenced by the Zen philosophy of the time, specifically from the Zen monk Takuan Soho. Specifically, Munenori seems to be drawing parallels to Takuan's other work, the Fudoshi Shinmyo Roku, the Divine Record of Immovable Wisdom. And one translator of the Yagyu scrolls, Hirawaki Sato, which you might be familiar with him if you've read The Sword and the Mind, he presents a really interesting theory about these books in The Sword and the Mind. That book itself is it's pretty short, and it combines Munetoshi's Munetoshi's own books, as well as Munenori's books, together with Takuan's divine record of immovable wisdom. And so you have this great starting place for Kenjutsu, I think. Again, that book is The Sword and the Mind. Oh yeah, sorry, I just skipped over the timeline of the scrolls. I'll go back to that in a second. Yeah, but yeah, here are the sources. Some sources I would recommend, that is. The Sword of the Mind by Hiroaki Sato, and The Life-Giving Sword by William Scott Wilson. Just two really great collections of round it all out. Let's see, where am I in my notes? Right. Oh yeah, so the Yagyu scrolls themselves. Yeah, the Heiho Kaden Sho in 1632 talked about that a little bit. But previously in 1601, Yagyu Munetoshi, one of the first headmasters of the school, he completed the Yagyu Ryu Heiho Mokuroku, which is basically the illustrated catalog of the Yagyu martial arts. And at the time, it was just a collection of images displaying various postures of the sword fighting style. And at the time, he had completed this as a gift to a famous no performer of the time. His name was God. Oh yeah, here we go. Komparu Shichiro Ujikatsu. And again, he was a famous no performer of the time. And then 106 years later, commentary was added to the book by one of the future students of the Yagyu school, Matsudaira Nobusada. And he was asked to add this commentary by Ujikatsu's descendants, who they had the book in their possession for a while, like for 100 years. And they basically asked him, hey, here are these pictures. We would like for you to add a commentary on this sword fighting style, since you belong to the school as well, and maybe you can shed some light on this. And yeah, from that, so we have the Heihu Mokuroku, Kaden Sho. And those are the that I've been studying, and they're obviously. Now here's the disclaimer. The class and what I have to say about it and what I have to say about Kenjutsu, it doesn't represent an official perspective of Yagyu Shinkage Ryu. I don't currently study under any specific Kenjutsu traditions or headmasters. I don't belong to any particular school. I am just an armchair Kenjutsu researcher for all intents and purposes. And something else too. Let's see. Just gotta center myself in my notes. Yeah, there we go. I should also draw a line between the research that I'm doing here and the kind of researcher that HEMA scholars have been doing for a while. Whereas HEMA, historical European martial arts, whereas that community has been recreating historical martial arts that had fallen from practice since the Middle Ages, I'm studying a living tradition and recontextualizing certain techniques when it's appropriate. So despite splitting into at least two different hereditary branches since the 17th century, Yagyu Shinkage Ryu is still maintained and appointed by headmasters as well as a traditional hierarchy. So I'm not trying to intrude on that. I'm taking English translations of the Yagyu scrolls and just going from there and doing what I can to implement this into SCA fencing. So I can't claim that my notions hold any kind of official validity in regards to the school and their teachings. But what I do is I read some books, I watch some videos, and I work it out with my commercially available Katana simulator. All right, and there are my sources, the two books that I mentioned. And later on in the class, we'll also be seeing some video demonstrations of Yagyu Shinkage Ryu. These are in the form of YouTube. Douglas, like a very interesting character. He he founded Kumekan in 1994. That's the official Shinkage-ryu study group. And we know it's official because it's authorized by Kajitsuka Yasushi. The most recent, or maybe not the most recent, but an important Shihan of the Otsubo branch in the Yakyu lineage. Sorry. Moving on. Now we can get into the physical characteristics of the weapon, and in just a moment I'll switch back over to my phone so I can show you some of the weapons that I have with me. But this is mine specifically. It's a Castile standard katana with a 30-inch blade, a 10-inch handle, and a 7.5 square-inch guard. That would be the Suba, and you notice it's pretty small compared to a rapier's guard. We'll get into the specifics of that in a second. Now, historically, at least, a katana it quote unquote prefers the cut over the thrust due to how it's balanced and how it's constructed. It just works better as a cutting weapon than as a thrusting weapon. Now, in our game, in a heavy rapier, to be specific, I think it has some advantages in that in doing a draw cut over a percussive cut, and that's just something that I do need to practice more. But that's my hypothesis, that even though we don't allow percussive cuts in heavy rapier, you can still do a draw cut with pretty decent levels of with a pretty decent success rate, I would think. But also historically, the katana really does prefer a draw cut, like a slashing cut over just a percussive strike. And a lot of kenjutsu masters will stress this as the difference between slashing and chopping. And when you're slashing with a katana, you're drawing the edge over a surface in line with the blade and just using as much of the cutting surface on that blade as possible. And when your cutting surface is pretty razor sharp, and when the metallurgy is just worked out to a degree that you can maintain a razor sharp edge, then absolutely, I think the draw cut is preferred there. Right, so moving on, I'll stop sharing my screen and switch over to my phone. Okay, and everyone can hear me okay? I think so, yeah. Right, so here are the weapons that I have with me. Just gonna bring my notes up on my laptop this time. There we go. All right. So most notable distinction between between the rapier and the katana, the guard. You'll notice the rapier has just way more coverage than a katana. A lot more hand protection, as well as kions or quillions. The katana just has the suba, and it's just something to be mindful of if you're doing kenjutsu and SCA fencing. That is that a lot of the techniques for rapier that rely on using the kion or the bell to displace somebody's tip away from you, it doesn't work out quite the same on a katana. Now, you may have some success just displacing a tip with the edge of the suba, but that's a very small surface area that you're working with. And so I've generally had more success, rather than relying on the suba to displace somebody's tip and just move their sword away from me. I rely on the whole length of the blade. And so using a katana against a rapier it looks a lot like classical saber fencing, to be honest. And there's more reasons why that is. I'll get into that in a minute. But just some more physical differences between the blades. This is just a Castile economy rapier. It's 37.5 inches, but still shorter than the Castile Katana. Oops, sorry, still longer than the Castile Katana. Again, the Castile Katana is about 30 inches long, including the tip. So again, you don't have the range advantage. You don't have the advantage of a complex guard to cover your hand and to hold out in front of you. And so you have to start looking for other kinds of advantages and just other natural strengths of the katana. Mr. Rapier. Where am I here? Okay, yeah. However, here, like the natural advantages that do come into play is that if you're practicing kenjutsu, at least by by Yagyu instruction, and if you're trying to practice according to the Yagyu scrolls, you're going to be using a katana in two hands. That Munenori and Munetoshi were writing down. They do have some plates in there about playing around with a wakizashi or like other kinds of swords held in the offhand, but generally it's a sword held in two hands. And so the advantage there is you have the lever arm, which all that means is that you have to do less work to hold your blade and to move it the same distance as you would be moving it if you were holding it with one hand. So again, the lever arm that lets you conserve energy while moving the blade. Also, even though the katana is shorter, and that means it has less of a range advantage on thrusts, having less blade to move around and having a shorter blade to move around means that, how do I put it? It's less weight that you need to move around with your hands. And so that's even more of a maneuverability advantage for you. And as a final point, a katana simulator that sits closer to your hands guard, if I can get it right there. Yeah. On my Castile, at least, the point of balance is right about there. And on a historic katana, it might be like pretty far down the blade, centered on the edge somewhere. Now for a historic katana, that's great because a lot of historic kenjutsu is focused on generating angular momentum into a cut. And if you see like people demonstrating historic kenjutsu, practicing it, the way they parry is very interesting because parry, like almost in parry, is the blade. I'll use this as an example, katana, rapier, whatever. But parries in historic kenjutsu happen in line with the blade. And rather than trying to block blades at a true cross, they'll deflect each other just in line with the cut itself. And it's the width of the katana. And I mean, obviously this is a simulator, but a historic katana would be much wider. But it's the width of the katana and the force applied like during a vertical cut that's generally what displaces the opponent's sword. Now, in heavy rapier, that's an issue because again, we're not trying to do percussive cuts, sub-kato. Yeah, so we're not trying to do percussive cuts in heavy rapier. So anything that focuses on jigging, it's just going to have to be a concession for us that like we'll have to work around it. We'll have to find other ways of navigating a plate and other ways of applying, or sorry, not a plate. Plate would be the European way of referring to techniques. When we take a waza, that is we try into SCA fencing, we steer away from focusing on generating angular momentum. Right. Yeah. Right. And where are my notes? Oh yeah, one final point. When you consider the weight distribution of a katana simulator compared to historic katana, uh, you can start to see where kenjutsu in the SCA breaks off from historic kenjutsu. And if you're really committed to practicing kenjutsu as historically as possible, you might consider those differences in weight distribution to be a problem. However, I think that actually rounds out a katana simulator's natural strengths. That is, so just to review, you have a shorter sword than your opponent, you're holding it in two hands, and your point of balance is relatively close to your hands. What you have is just a very nimble sword, and you can just make very nimble and precise parries and guards, or sorry, parries and attacks with that. And in a heavy rapier context, where you're really not trying to do more work than is necessary to constrain your opponent's blade, having a really nimble sword and using it in a way that doesn't expend much energy at all, that's great, I think. So, and if you commit to making forceful attacks, to making these big attacks for the sake of generating angular momentum, even if they're historically accurate, you risk performing an action that is either too big or it might even physically harm your opponent. And we don't want to do either of those things. Like if we make attacks that are too big, that just gives our opponent more of a chance to like constrain us and attack in contra tempo. And if we're making attacks that are physically harmful, that's a problem as well. We want everybody to be able to leave the field without injury. And so again, we have to make some concessions when we're interpreting historic techniques. We like if they focus on generating angular momentum, we need to find some other way, and we need to just find some other way of implementing kenjutsu into SC. Yeah, there's our two extremes right there. We shouldn't use a katana as if it were a rapier, and we shouldn't use a katana as if we're being totally historically accurate. So somewhere in the middle, that's what we're aiming for. And yeah, that's the real challenge, is to figure out what we can use from these historic scrolls, what we cannot use, and what we can use in modified forms. And that's just been a kind of first principle for me while I've been practicing and analyzing these techniques. So at this point, I'm switching over to the demonstration portion of the class. I just need to rearrange some of my stuff here. Get my desk out of the way so I can actually hold the fence. Won't take but a minute. All right. I'm going to put myself into portrait mode so you can see my whole body more clearly. But what I'm going to do now is just take you through some of the first fundamentals of Yasuo Munenori's book, the Heiho Karansho. Again, that is the family transmitted book of swordsmanship. And specifically, okay, here we go. Now, the first couple things I'm going to show you are what Munenori calls the three elements. And these are just three general areas to focus on and think about while you're practicing or even in the middle of the fight. And they can be broken down into posture, the arms and legs, and the sword. So the way you hold yourself with regards to those three things. And he doesn't say too much about that, other than these are the areas to focus on. But given the way they're introduced, yeah, it's just like modes of analyzing and critiquing swordsmanship within that particular school. And so after that are the 5 kinds, as Munenori calls them. And generally these are just points on posture, specific instructions on how to hold yourself. And a lot of these are going to be familiar. Generally, hold your body sideways to your opponent. So stand in profile. We're very familiar with that already. Just when you're in profile, you present less of a target area. Same thing in fencing, same thing in Kenjutsu. Now, point number 2, regard your opponent's fists as equal to your shoulders. And what I take that to mean is to keep your stance and therefore your center of gravity generally lowered. So almost as if your shoulders are on the same level as your opponent's fists. And obviously that's not going to be the case in all. It's not going to be the thing to do in all cases, like especially if your opponent adopts a very low guard, you're not trying to get as low as possible. So to analyze that point a little more clearly or get some other instruction about moving on. Number 3, make a shield of your fists. And so what I take this to mean from looking at some Yagyu videos and just like working it out on my own, is that to make a shield of your fists, you align your fists and therefore your sword to defend yourself against an enemy strike. And now for historic Kenjutsu, this would involve making, like I mentioned this earlier, making vertical cuts in with opponent's cut and deflect in the middle of their strike. Again, rather than looking for a true cross to block the strike, you're cutting into their cut. But yeah, the idea is that if you put your fists out in front of you, your fists should bring your sword in between. Hands in.
Ogata, you've frozen. You've been frozen.
Froze?
Yeah, you froze, so you might need to repeat that entire last section, that last bit.
Hey, sorry about that. I'll be right back in.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Right. But yeah, that's basically what it means to make a shield of your fists. Just put your sword in between your body and the opponent's sword. Right. Moving on. Point number 5. Put your weight on your forward knee and knee, and by stroke, just yeah, it looks something like that. Now, Munenori doesn't talk about this in detail, but generally, at least in Yagyu Shinkageryu, you see a lot of stances with the feet both pointed in the same direction, and this might be a little unusual if you're coming from a rapier context, where the idea is to have a back-weighted stance and to have your feet pointed in opposite directions. And now the point of doing that in a rapier is that you're loading the spring back here, is that you're storing up energy in your back leg and then releasing that on a powerful lunge forward. Now the difference here is when you have your feet pointed forward, what I think this is very conducive to. I mean, you can make lunges with it. Like you can put your weight on your back leg and then launch yourself forward in a lunge, but also steps easier. Like especially if you have your weight resting on your front knee, that frees up your back leg to make like just steps out, steps forward. Yeah, to just pass around your front foot. And as we'll see in some of the Yagyu Shinkai-Ryu techniques, there are a lot of cases when you want to make these steps offline or just make passing steps forward. And I think especially if you have a katana and if you're trying to overcome the range advantage of a rapier, I think making very quick passing steps can absolutely work to your advantage, because what you're trying to do is close enough to your opponent, like pretty much to infighting distance, that you can just make draw cuts on their body and not have to worry about their rapier, because it's all like you're already past it. Oh yeah, and another point of interest. So I maintained a blog for a minute. I still do technically, just where I talk about historic kenjutsu and where I solicit commentary from other practitioners. But I found out through that there are actually better names for just having your feet both facing the same direction, or having your feet in opposite directions. In Aikido, at least, as well as in Hokushin Ito Ryo, these positions are referred to as Shomen Ashi and Shimoku Ashi. The idea is that when your feet are pointed in the same direction, that's Shomen Ashi, and when your feet are pointed in opposite directions, that's more like it. When your feet are pointed in opposite directions, that's Shimoku Ashi. And I can type that in the chat later on if anyone's interested. So I think when you take all the points of the 5 kinds together, I think there's really strong evidence that Yagyu Shinkage-ryu was done in period, and can be done really effectively with both feet pointed forward. Again, those 5 points are: hold your body sideways to your opponent, regard your opponent's fists as equal to your shoulders, basically keep your stance low, make a shield of your fists, so align your blades so that it protects you. Stretch out your left elbow, so you get. I didn't talk too much about this, but just by stretching out your left elbow while holding the sword, like if you keep your assume your right hand dominant, if you keep your right elbow just bent a little bit, and if you stretch out your left, this lets you stand in profile a little more easily, while still guarding yourself with the sword and holding it out away from you. Right. Yeah, stretch out your left elbow, put your weight on your forward knee. So yeah, taking all of those points together, it makes a really strong case for standing with both feet pointed forward. And now moving on, we've got the 3 elements and the 5 kinds, and now we get on. So a lot of these are going to be really familiar if you've done any kind of longsword work or any kind of classical saber work even. But just the basic postures are, they're as follows. So up here, I won't be able to do the fully extended position because I've got a pretty low ceiling, but you get the idea. This right here is Jodan, and it's just the high posture. Let's see. Yeah, Jodan is the sword held in both hands, positioned in front or at the level of your head, the sword pointing upward towards its tip. That's important. Or with the hands positioned above your head, the cutting edge of the sword turned up and its tip tilting away from the enemy. And the idea with this is that Jodan is the position from which you generate all your angular momentum. And it's generally a good position to return to when making a cut. There's even one particular technique in Shinkage-ryu, just called riotous cutting or concomitant cutting. Just basically means make repeated strikes from Jodan at the enemy's head. And the idea is, like, up here like this, you can generate a lot of angular momentum. And there are a lot of techniques in Shinkage-ryu that just either return to Jodan or they start in Jodan. And again, like, we have to make some concessions about that. if we want to implement Kenjutsu in heavy rapier, we have to find other ways of making those techniques happen. So generally, Jodan, not a good spot to be in. But moving on, you've also got Chudan, which is basically the sword held out in front of you, the tip about level with your enemy's eyes, and the edge just facing forward. And in modern kendo, they have different distinctions about Chudan, like just positioned down the middle so that it bisects your body, versus a Chudan that guards you on the inside line, or a Chudan that guards you on the outside line. At this point in Yagyu Shinkai-Ryu, they don't really distinguish between those different variations of Chudan. They're all Chudan. And then you have Gedan, which is basically the edge of the sword pointed down, the tip pointed down, but still held out in front of you. That's simple enough. Some other postures that are distinguished in modern kendo that don't really get a clear distinction in historic, or at least in this historic Kenjutsu system. Those would be positions like, here we go. Yeah. So right here, this would be waki. And the idea is that the edge of your blade is facing up. Your tip is pointed back away from you. And you're just holding the sword so that it seems to disappear behind your legs. And again, that is waki. Munenori, he calls it Chinryu instead, which basically means like a dragon below the water. Now, in addition to Chinryu, there's also Hasso. And Munenori calls this yin position. And talk to the rapier wielder, sir. Oh, gotcha. Yeah, thank you very much. It is a great katana. All right, but yeah, Hasso. Munenori doesn't distinguish between this posture on the right shoulder or the left shoulder, but the idea is that you have your sword just tucked back like this, over one or the other shoulder. Your tip is pointing away from the enemy, but your edge is facing forward. And the idea is that this is another position for just generating a lot of angular momentum and cutting across your body, cutting across the body. Let's see. I see we get a question from the. Oh no, might not have a question. Anyways, so I've shown you some of the basic guards: Jodan, Chudan, Gedan, Waki, and Hasso, also called water and yin position. Does anybody have any questions right now? I've also talked a little bit about the history and the scholarship here. Which garb would work well for rapier?
I think he basically is asking about basic rapier, and my advice would be to hang for a bit at the end of this session, and maybe I can answer some of those questions. Okay.
Yeah,
this class is specifically about katana in the SCA. So hang for a few minutes afterwards, and I'll try to answer your questions. All righty, Abin? All right, thank you.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions before I
speak up, folks? If you have a question, unmute yourself.
Yes, please.
Anybody?
Oh, we got a question. I guess we got a question about the
okay, here you go.
Yeah. Do they have a distinction about the height of your Hasso? This is interesting because no, they don't. Hasso could be right here, but and we'll see in a second. I want to get to the video demonstration. Is you'll see some people who form their Hasso up here, and the only thing that matters here is that the sword is angled over your shoulder, and that it's sort of sort of back. It's no longer in front of you, but it's back. It's inviting an attack along this exposed flank. And the idea is that when the enemy chooses to attack that flank, usually this is met with some sort of step off line and a cut. Try and angle my camera so you can see that. So from Hasso, usually you'll invite an attack along this exposed flank. You'll step off line and cut in response, or you'll step back and cut. But the idea is that you're presenting an invitation to your opponent through Hasso, and it's not the same kind of invitation that that you'll get from guards like Chudan or Gedan or Jodan, as these are held, like these involve holding the sword out in front of you. Okay. So I think that's most of what I wanted to talk about, just regarding the basic postures, the foot position, the basic guards. Any more questions before we move on to video analysis? All right, moving on then. So if I can get some of these videos up on my laptop, that will be what we look at. This is one in particular that I've enjoyed a lot. I've practiced a lot. And my idea for how this video analysis can go is that we'll watch the video. We'll just do a kind of frame by frame look at what the participants are doing, how they're moving, and how that affects their game. And then we'll have some kind of a jam session about, all right, now what are some ways that we can modify this technique in order to work against a rapier fencer? Like, what do we need to change about it? What can be the same? And yeah, just something like that.
And you have about 10 minutes.
Awesome. That is just enough time, actually. So I'm going to share my screen here. And there we go. So you should see two Kenjutsu ka, that is Kenjutsu practitioners. On the right, you have Douglas Tong in the white, and in the black, you have one of his students. I believe this is Scott. Yeah. So here we go. This is actually the second waza in the illustrated catalog. In the illustrated catalog of the Yagyu martial arts. It's called Zante Setsutetsu, which basically means cutting through nails or severing steel. And I believe, yeah, Douglas is the one who will be performing this technique. Scott will be attacking. All right. So you see Douglas approaching. He is. So Douglas has brought his blade up, and just for a closer look at that, I'll stop sharing for a second so you can see me on my phone. What Douglas is doing right there looks something like this. He's brought his right foot forward. He is resting his weight on his back leg. That'll be important later. And he has his sword up with the edge facing up, and just having it kind of up here. This is almost like Prima. It's quite like Prima, actually, in both saber and rapier. Just in two hands, if you can picture that. And now, moving on. I'll share the screen again. Okay, so he's got his sword up. His weight is resting on his back leg. And Scott is going to attack him just with a cut to his, yeah, I believe that's the inside line. So there he goes. There's the cut. And we'll see Douglas is evading that by just stepping back. He's stepping back, and okay, so I had that wrong. That's not a cut to the inside line. That's a cut to the outside line that's happening. But again, what that looks like is Douglas is starting right here. he's taking a step back and guarding himself with his sword while he does that. It's a lot of switching back and forth. I apologize. And now we see that from that guard with his sword pointed down, Douglas is going to just deliver a cut to Scott's hands. Again, here's what that looks like.
Oh.
Yes, I think I heard someone?
No, I just was looking and saying, "Oh, so wonderful."
Yeah,
my-
gotcha. Yeah, it's really lovely to see. It's just one of my favorites. And so Douglas follows this up by he'll respond when Scott is positioning himself to launch another attack, but Douglas comes in with a passing step to attack Scott's hands with a percussive strike. And that's actually pretty common in Yagyu fencing. The idea is that a lot of the time you're not going for a kill strike immediately. You're just trying to disable their hands. If their hands are disabled, they can't hold the sword anymore. And a lot of the time you're striking both hands simultaneously because this anticipates somebody else who is armed with a two-handed sword. And so in the 7 minutes that we have left, I was thinking we could have just a quick jam session about what do you like about this technique? What could work in SCA heavy rapier? What cannot work? And like, what might we need to modify? I have my own notions about this, but I'd like to hear what you guys have to say as well about this.
So go ahead and unmute yourself, folks. And yeah, let's give him some ideas, some thoughts. I know some of you have thoughts. So let's hear him.
So how'd you get started with rapier and trying to mix that in with, at least with the katana stuff, and trying to mix it in with rapier?
I would prefer to talk about how I got started with this maybe at another time. You can send me a private message on Facebook though. That would be I'm just Charlie Denton on Facebook. But yeah, if you would like to ask me that question there, it would be totally cool. For now, I would like to talk about the video specifically. Just
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So you have not yet done this with have you talked to anybody in your kingdom as far as the reaction to using this in regular rapier bouts with rapier? I mean,
yes.
I would be confused if somebody stepped up to me with one of those and they're holding it like this, and I'm going, whoa.
Yeah.
If I've never faced
not
it
something
before,
you see.
it'd be a little intimidating. I mean,
Yeah, it's not something you see very often.
No.
Yeah,
I mean, it'd be interesting. Make for an interesting bout for sure.
Oh yeah.
But yeah.
Regarding that question specifically, I actually get a lot of people who have talked to me about just people who try to implement it in fencing, and either they are they can't overcome the range advantage of a rapier enough to make it effective, or they've taken historic kenjutsu and they haven't worked on calibrating those techniques or modifying them to fit with fighting against a rapier. So they wind up just really like overthrowing it and generating too much angular momentum to really work in the system. They open themselves up to attacks and they wind up striking in ways that are not safe. And yeah, so I really designed this class, and I'm working on modifying these plates in order to overcome some of that and create a different impression about kenjutsu.
So it's mostly
that's
draw cuts, right?
What's up?
You're doing mostly draw cuts or tip cuts mostly, right? You're not doing a lot of thrusting.
Cuts, yeah. No, thrusting that works in the that comes into play in the Yagyu system, and I should clarify, not all kenjutsu practitioners are doing it in an unwieldy or unsafe way.
Right, right.
I just think, yeah, like if you're trying to implement something in SCA fencing that was really taught to you in a very different context, you have to do some work of interpretation. And yeah, what was I saying?
Well, we have another question here too. I think Teleanor, is that how you pronounce it?
Eleanor, like Eleanor with
Sure.
a T in front of it.
Okay. Ogata, are you still there, Ogata-san?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry, I think I froze briefly.
Did we cut you off?
Oh no, you're
Oh,
good.
okay. I want to try to get to some other questions here too, real quick.
Sure, yeah.
Teleanor?
Yeah, so a bit about my background. I started working with sword in the mundane Olympic style fencing and spent a couple of years doing a lot of sword work with Aikido. And you might have covered this because I'm actually here to run the arts and sciences for the next 2 hours, but I'm part of the fencing community and wanted to jump in here a bit too. And that question is about footwork, because
Awesome.
if you covered it, let me know. I'll bail out. But a lot of people in the rapier community are very linear, and my experience with the Japanese sword art is that there's angularity and curves and even spirals that you trace with your feet to get off the line. We talk about getting off the line. Well, man, that's a great way to do it. So have you got any experience with taking, if not the whole package, at least the footwork into SCA rapier?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of footwork. I mentioned this briefly. Yeah, that there is a lot of footwork in Aikido, and even some Aikido terms for understanding the footwork that come into play. Basically, that you have a shomen ashi with both feet pointed forward, and then a shimoku ashi with both feet pointed in directions. That usually in rapier you're accustomed to just lunges forward in shimoku ashi. But yeah, most katana, or yeah, most kenjutsu can happen in shomen ashi with both feet pointed forward. I have seen a lot of people like really implement steps offline and angular stepping, as you might call it, into rapier with great effectiveness. I think you see it in some Spanish styles as well, but even in Capoferro, which even in Capoferro, you still see offline steps, either to take a passing step, or in the case of the incartata, just constraining an opponent's blade to the inside line and taking this step behind yourself. Like, that's absolutely a good use of offline stepping. But yeah, in
terms, what you just did is called a tenkan, where you rotate off the back foot, you rotate the back foot. And the more traditional thing that we do, the name of that is irimi, which means entering. And so entering. And my time has come. Thank you for the answer. I got to go host another
No worries. Yeah, I think that's it for this class. I'm a little disappointed we couldn't break apart the technique as much as I would have liked, but
come
that's
and teach
okay.
again. Come and teach again for our next rapier track. Kato, you had a question. I think that's probably best addressed to Ogata-san personally on his Facebook, probably. We just don't have time for it right now. If Ogata-san is called Charlie Denton on Facebook, is his mundane name.
That's correct, yeah.
And so I think
from
that
the barony of South Downs and the Kingdom of Meridian.
that's directed to him personally. Well, everybody, thank you, especially Ogata-san. Thank you.
Thank you.
Arigato.
Arigato.
Appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And like I said, come do part 2. We'll have another track at some point, I'm sure. But everyone, thank you for attending. And I hope you'll check out some of the other things. We've had a very nice track here today. I hope you'll check out some of the other things going on in the kingdom on our other sites. All right, thanks everybody. And this is being recorded, so you can find it after they post it on the West Kingdom Yahoo YouTube channel. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.